One of the things that has made this past year, give or take a couple of months, so difficult, has been the constant presence of death in our lives. There was and continues to be the coronavirus. So many lives lost to an invisible threat. And we have spent much of the year on guard against it. Every time we leave our homes, our apartments, our dorm rooms, we have to take precautions against death. It was death on the news. State violence, which took the lives of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. Mass shootings in Atlanta, Colorado, and elsewhere. Ongoing conflict in Palestine, genocide in Myanmar and Armenia, civil war in Yemen. We lost icons like Kobe Bryant, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Chadwick Boseman, Cicely Tyson. And this is on top of all the ways that death is present with us during normal times. Friends passing unexpectedly, family members growing old, loved ones succumbing to illness, injury, or accident. This wears on us. As a result, it becomes very easy to settle into rhythms that allow us to ignore the death that is around us. And sometimes I think that this can be a helpful coping mechanism, because as humans we have finite capacity for trauma. So we can't be looking death in the face all the time, because we have jobs to do and exams to study for, and papers to write, and projects to do. But if this year has taught me anything, it is that we, and when I say we, I mean people living in the United States, we are not great at being honest with ourselves about what is going on around us. We have to develop our capacity for seeing the world as it is, even if that means looking at death. We have to learn how to live fully and faithfully, even when death is all around us and it makes us want to bury our heads in the sand. And our text today is an invitation for us to think about what it means to live fully and faithfully in the face of death. The entire story revolves around the death of Lazarus, beloved brother of Martha and Mary, and a close friend of Jesus. While all of the characters in the story respond differently to his death, each of them refuses to turn away from it. They each choose to practice faithfulness in the face of death. So let's start with Martha. Martha is a woman with a bad reputation. So most Christians know her best, not from this story, but a story in Luke chapter 10, where when Jesus comes to their house, her sister Mary goes to sit at the feet of Jesus, while Martha remains at a distance, distracted by many tasks. Now, interpreters of that story have, for centuries, criticized Martha for choosing to do other things rather than sit at the feet of Jesus. And they've taken that decision, and they've inflated it into a statement about her entire character. You might not be surprised that most of the people who have done this are men. And now, I'm not preaching that text today, but I do think it's significant to note at the outset that in this passage, it is Martha and not Mary who first goes to Jesus. So perhaps we have unfairly viewed Martha and her sister as one-dimensional characters, rather than the fact that they were really full and complex human beings. And in this text, the first thing that Martha says is, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of God." And then a little while later, when Jesus asks her if she believes that he is the resurrection and the life, Martha responds by saying, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." Now, Martha is a woman who has just lost her brother. She is standing in front of someone who she knows could have saved his life. I cannot imagine the grief and the pain and the rage that she was holding in her body in that moment. And yet, she offers these two incredible confessions of radical belief in Jesus. Despite having every reason to not want anything to do with Jesus, she nevertheless confesses that he is the Messiah. So for Martha, living faithfully in the face of death means holding radical hope alongside grief. Now next we have Martha's sister, Mary. Now when Martha leaves to go see Jesus, Mary stays at home. And this is what we would have expected. We would expect Mary to be at home because in Jewish practice at the time, there were a number of traditions which organized the burial and grieving of the dead. So funerals in particular were a journey from the home to the tomb and then back to the home. And the immediate family of the deceased was expected to stay at home for the first 7 days after the body was buried. So when Mary leaves, everyone would have expected that if she's going anywhere, she's going to the tomb because there's nowhere else for her to go, according to expectation. Mary does not go where she is expected to go. She instead hears from her sister that the teacher is calling her and chooses to get up quickly and go out to him. She chooses to leave the place where she is expected to be so that she can kneel at the feet of Jesus. For Mary, living faithfully in the face of death means defying expectations to respond to God's call. Now, these two sisters are surrounded by a community, and their community also plays a role in this text. So we learn in verse 19 that many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. We learn that they weep along with Mary. We learn that they go with her when she leaves the house to run to Jesus. Even though she does not go where they expect her to go, they still go with her. And yes, some of them are skeptical, while some of them are amazed at how much Jesus loved Lazarus. Others grumble, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? And others were undoubtedly wondering why Mary was bucking tradition and heading toward Jesus rather than toward the tomb. But regardless, they went with her. They wept with her. So for the community, living faithfully in the face of death means weeping with those who weep. And now lastly, we come to Jesus. From the beginning of this story, Jesus seems to, at every turn, do the opposite of what one would expect. And I emphasize that because it's very easy to sort of gloss over some of the things that Jesus does in this story. So perhaps you heard this story in church growing up, and so you weren't paying attention to the details because you know how the story ends. Or maybe you are a college student on the verge of finals, so you spaced out a little bit during the reading because you've got a lot on your mind. Regardless, there is a lot that Jesus does in this story that really just defies logic. And I want to make sure that we've got it all. So let me lay out this list. He dismisses the reports of a close friend's illness. He chooses to go back to a region where he has just faced an attempt on his life. He then delays that return by 2 days, knowing that his friend will die. He questions Martha and her grief rather than comforting her. He openly weeps in front of the crowd, and then to cap it all off, he asks that same crowd to roll away the stone in front of the tomb of a rotting corpse. There are so many moments in this story where Jesus could have acted differently. He could have done something that would have been easier or offered a quicker solution or made more sense to the people who were around him. And yet, Jesus consistently and intentionally moves slowly. At every point, he resists what must have been an incredibly strong urge to do the logical thing or the easy thing or the thing that just would have gotten people off his back and out of his business. And he does this. He resists that urge because he knows that when he stands in front of that empty tomb with the stone rolled away, that God will be glorified. But to get there, Jesus has to resist taking the easy way out. So for Jesus, living faithfully in the face of death means doing what is slow and difficult rather than what is quick and easy. Holding radical hope alongside grief. Defying expectations to respond to God's call. Weeping with those who weep. Doing what is slow and difficult rather than what is quick and easy. Living faithfully in the face of death. Now the story of Lazarus is not just a story about death. The story ends with Jesus calling the dead Lazarus out from the grave, and he emerges. Hands and feet bound, face wrapped in cloth, but fully and completely alive. So the story of Lazarus is not just a story about death, it is also a story about resurrection, about the power of God bringing new life out of death. And as Christians, we believe and confess that death does not have the final word. Just 3 weeks ago on Easter, we celebrated the resurrection of Jesus. God's affirmation not only of Jesus and his ministry, but also God's announcement to the world that life cannot and will not be suppressed. Through the resurrection, God tells us that new life is possible even in the midst of a world that is full of death. That is good news. Resurrection is an invitation. It's an invitation to turn our eyes to the world, a real world full of death and despair and sorrow, and choose to live lives of faith, energized by God's promise of new life. So today, as we stand in the light of the resurrection, and as the semester comes to a close, I want to encourage you to reflect on where you might be able to practice the kinds of faithfulness we see in this story from the Gospel of John. So perhaps you are grieving the passing of a loved one, the death of a plan for what's next, or the end of a meaningful relationship. As you grieve, are there ways that you can hold on to hope alongside that grief? Can you give yourself permission to feel all of the things you need to feel and trust that you will come out on the other side still standing? Maybe you're feeling unsettled in your major or your job. Maybe you're feeling pulled in a direction that would mess up your four-year plan or disrupt what your parents or your friends expect from you. And you're afraid to take a risk because the world feels too unstable right now. How might you respond to the Spirit calling you towards something new, even if it would mean failing to meet what others expect? Or maybe you know someone who is dealing with loss or pain. Can you weep with them? Can you practice radical empathy and care for someone who needs it? Or maybe you are just burnt out. You're tired of this semester, this year, and all the shit that's come with it. And you're looking for every corner that you can possibly cut places where cutting corners would cut off too much. So are there things that we need to see through to the end, no matter how exhausting and difficult they are? And if so, can you lean on God and your community to help you get through? End of the semester is almost here. You are so close. When the semester ends, the rest of life will still be here. And so as you run, walk, or crawl toward the finish line, look for ways to practice faithful living in the face of death. And as you do, may the God who raised Lazarus and Jesus from the dead lead us all